Hello, good evening everyone. Welcome to Exploratorium Berlin. Welcome to our Denkraum Improvisation, the thinking space improvisation, our department for theory and research on improvisation. My name is Matthias Maschat. I'm responsible for this department here. And today I have the great pleasure that I have two guests, Ursel Schlicht and Robert Dick. It's in the course of our sound and lecture format, and it's number 19 today, and it is called the Galilean Moons. Ursel and Robert, they have a project together with this name. Sound and lecture means there's sound, obviously, but there will maybe not exactly be lecture, but talk at least. So there will be two parts of the concerts. We're going to start with the music, and there will be a short break of maybe 5 minutes, and then we will continue with talking to each other about what we have heard and other things related to improvisation. I think I will not say anything else for the moment. I would like to have the music speaking first. So please welcome Robert Dick and Ursel Schlicht.
thank you so much for being here. Is this on? Yeah. And that piece was called Tendrils, and it was composed by Ursel Schlicht. The next piece is called Rune. That's R-U-N-E, not R-U-I-N, and it's named after the ancient Celtic mystical symbols. So it's not runes, it's just one rune. And we created this piece together.
And that is a contrabass flute, upside down.
I'm ready for a Lucian Freud portrait.
Und das ist inspiriert von einem Buch, was ich las von Alan Wiseman. Und Alan Wiseman beschäftigte sich mit der Frage, was aus diesem Planeten wird, wenn die Menschen irgendwann nicht mehr da sind. Und da treten ganz interessante Phänomene auf. Und in dem einen Kapitel war von einem wunderbaren, dem größten europäischen erhaltenen Urwaldstück die Rede. Und das ist eben dieser paradiesische Charakter, der heißt A Lingering Scent of Eden. Und unter anderem ist es auch inspiriert von der Flöte mit dem Glissando Headjoint und dieser Möglichkeit, was Robert auch viel macht, so man fühlt sich fast in der Natur bei manchen Momenten. Ja, so viel dazu.
This next piece, did I announce the title? That was called A Lingering Scent of Eden by Ursel Schlicht. And next is a piece called Bells for Diz, which I created. And Diz, in this case, not surprisingly, is Dizzy Gillespie. Now, when Dizzy played, he had two distinct personae. When he played the trumpet, he stood stock still, and all of the energy went through the horn. When he wasn't playing the trumpet, he liked to play these Afro-Cuban bells, and when he did so, he moved and danced absolutely beautifully. And it's that persona that I'm thinking of. suite, the Galilean Moons. And it only took 400 years, but the Vatican finally decided that Galileo was right. The sun is in the center of the solar system. Now, the four moons are Io, Europa, Callisto, and Ganymede. And if you're a devoted science fiction reader, you would, of course, know that. And Io is the most geologically active body in the solar system. Europa is covered by ice, and there is a sea of water underneath that ice. And if there's life anywhere else in the solar system, it's probably in that sea. Callisto is a very ancient, cratered surface that really has no tectonic activity. And Ganymede is the largest moon in the solar system with the highest mass. And again, with a real sense of ancient stillness.
So welcome back. Thank you very much, Robert and Ursel, for your music. It was really marvelous, fantastic playing, interesting pieces. I really enjoyed it a lot. I just said it makes such a big difference. I knew, of course, the music from CD and also from videos, but when you hear it live in the room, it's really another experience, of course. For the beginning, I would just like to introduce you a little bit more to the audience. Ursel Schlicht, as you have heard, she's a really good pianist. She plays improvised music, jazz, new music, and she's also a scholar and educator. She lived in Brooklyn for many years as a freelance musician and educator, and she designed and taught seminars on music and gender and on improvisation at Ramapo College of New Jersey. She has taught music at Rutgers University and masterpieces of Western music at Columbia University in New York until 2013. And for about 10 years, she is back in Germany now, where she teaches improvisation at the University of Kassel. Ursel also holds a doctorate in musicology from the University of Hamburg, and she has published a book about the working conditions of women jazz musicians. That was the PhD. It's this book here. It's going to be music first. And one of her main interests is fostering intercultural collaboration and exchange. For example, she has worked extensively with refugees from several areas in the Middle East. And Robert Dick, flutist, composer, improviser, author, teacher, and inventor. He was born and raised in New York City. He holds degrees from Yale College and the Yale School of Music, and he has received many commissions, grants, and prizes for his compositions, including a Guggenheim Fellowship and the Pro Musicis Foundation International Award. He teaches at New York University and the City University of New York Graduate Center. And also, as you have heard maybe, Robert has revolutionized flute playing in a way, you could say. He has developed so many contemporary techniques and wrote them down systematically in 3 books called The Other Flute. There's tone development through extended techniques, and as a third, circular breathing for the flutist. And you've seen this before also. He also developed the instrument further by inventing the glissando headjoint. And taking this together, you've pretty much redefined the flute and piano duo. And yeah, how you did that, we are going to talk about this. Maybe we could just start with the title, the Galilean Moons, which you have played in the end, the suite that you have introduced a little bit already on the moons, on the 4 moons detected by Galileo Galilei. How did you come up with this idea, with this composition?
Well, we were invited to play at the Festival Cervantino in Guanajuato, Mexico. I think that's the correct pronunciation. And the theme of their festival that year was Galileo. And so we thought about that and thought, well, the moons are such great images, and so we developed the suite. And it was premiered at the festival, and that was in the year 2007?
I think it was later than that, but I don't remember now. It was in the. It's more than 10 years ago that we did it, and I thought these pieces were just a lot of fun to research and to improvise around these different ideas. How do you create music that depicts an object that is ancient and that doesn't do any sonic something particular, as opposed to another moon that might just erupt all the time, or something that has very contrasting surfaces and activities. So it was fun to work with that, and at the time we just looked up information on each of those moons, what the properties are, how big they were, stuff like that. And we have never played this suite outside of one concert in Kassel in Germany. So when I was first invited here, which was several years ago because we had to postpone and repostpone, I thought these pieces need to be heard and I wanted them on the program.
Yeah, the idea is to create the sense that we are all on the surface of EO, then we're all on Ganymede, or we're all on Callisto, and what it would be like, and the experience not only physically, but the kind of spiritual sense, like in the last movement, those voices that would have spoken, millions of years before, in a language that, is completely incomprehensible, but somehow understandable.
So we've done some intergalactic travel already.
I like to work with these images because you have a very specific structure. I think everybody could hear which moon was which one. And at the same time, it's very free how any given piece is going to sound at a specific time. There are certain structures that are agreed on. So first we improvise around those ideas, and then we come up with sounds that go well together. I particularly like when in EO sometimes you don't hear whether it's the flute or the piano that creates a specific sound. It really is merging well, and but it's always a surprise how it actually really will sound the next time. So it's not a notated thing that has to really follow something exact every single time, which is important to us as improvisers.
Yeah, it's central to our music that we use composition in different forms and different manners, but every piece has extensive improvisation in it. There's enough classical music for flute and piano. It's covered, and we don't have to worry about that. And so we can be much more free with what we do.
Yeah, and at the same time, we want to do something that sounds different from other music that we've heard flute and piano do. So it's a challenge to come up with something that you feel like is different enough to really just add something to the language.
Yes, but I think it's very important to note that we're never doing anything to be different. There is no assumption that there's some sort of external norm, and that therefore we must contrast with it. Of course, that eliminates an awful lot of academic jargon, because we have not transgressed a single border, because we have never acknowledged a border and are not concerned with it. And instead it is following the music, and the essence of creating music is to hear the music that has not been heard. And that is where the music comes from. It's not out of a concern with what is already there, how can we be different?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point also with this notion of the border. Where are those borders? I think also in this kind of music, often it is said when it's beyond the border, step across the border, and these kind of ideas, but they are not necessarily designed. And yeah, as you said, it's not about coming up with something different from anything, but just using the vocabulary and extending it, and yeah, finding the movements from within the music.
So as you heard, the piece that clearly had the most through composition in it was Ursel's lingering sense of Eden, where we actually did engage with harmony and things like that. But that too has a lot of improvisation in it. Other pieces in our repertoire range from, well, there's a piece called A Feather Framed, and it's just an image, and we'll play from that image. I was thinking of the feathers in popular art, Dumbo's magic feather. No, everybody's concentrating on Dumbo, but I like the feather, and two other pieces that one of my pieces is called Sic biscuitus disintegrat, which is Latin for "that's the way the cookie crumbles." Well, it translates as kind of thus the biscuit disintegrates. And that has a written out head, and its structure is very similar to many jazz pieces. There's a written out head, there's a duo improvisation, there's a piano solo, there's a flute solo, and then there is the head again. And so basically the musical idea is what is the impetus that drives to find the kind of structure and how the piece will work. And so every piece, some people say, well, there are no rules, but there are rules. Every piece has its own rules. And so it's basically, again, that idea of trying to hear the music that hasn't been heard and to hear how it goes, and then to find a way to play it.
So one could say that there's different levels of improvisation. First of all, there's improvisation in developing the pieces, and those improvisation develop into compositions.
Yes, I mean, you have some of these ideas and then you try them out, and sometimes in a different rehearsal we don't like what we did that much anymore, and we just try to go a different way and find something that holds over time, that we feel like, yeah, this is actually, this moon, yeah, the volcanic activity is, these are the sounds that work best for this image, and like that. So there is, of course, there is improvisation and trying things out to arrive at something, at some structure and some musical development that we feel like is strong enough to be done over time. And that's part of the interesting research that happens. I don't find it always obvious to find a structure when you improvise, because improvising needs a fair amount of freedom.
Sometimes it's actually really hard, to find, working on ideas, and well, anybody who's written anything knows this. There are times when it flows freely or inspired. There are times when it just gets really difficult. And as frustrating as that can be, my sense is that when it gets really hard, it means we're on the verge of breaking through to something. And you just have to hang in there. And there are times I was racking my brains. I'm like, God, what happens now? And then there's also the kind of the in performance, there is yet another kind of energy. And I know throughout my career, I've often not really had a complete concept of a piece, but I had the beginnings, I had the sense of it, and took it out on stage and just played it, which I could not have done by myself at home. And that, I believe, happens because there is much more energy available in performance, because that's where the audience provides. Your energy was important to how we played tonight. And I'd like to thank you for it.
So, to resume, there's improvisation on three levels. There's in developing the compositions. Composing is a kind of improvisation process, and then fixing some elements from it. And then the compositions themselves are kind of open forms partly, so that you have the choices between different structural decisions, for example, the use of material. There's also some freedom in this.
Well, the open form concept relates to, I think, other things, more like what Earl Brown might have done. And it's not like we have, a page of choices and like, how will we go through the maze this time?
Yeah. But it's rather about the performance process, as you said, about how to interpret certain compositional ideas.
Certain moments are very, very defined. When the other person does this, then that happens. So, So you will recognize, if we play pieces another time, which one is which, because there is enough definition to really define things. But when this moment comes, can be a little bit open. Beginnings, endings, turning points. Sometimes there's a free introduction, sometimes there is a clear idea, like what to play towards, so that the other person comes in on. And I like that there is variety, that every piece has a different thing to it.
I think that often you have really good titles. You have starting to talk about the titles already, and this plays a big role for you, I think. And for me, there's always a difference between improvisation and composition, because when you have a title, it's probably going to be a kind of composition, because it's hard to find a title of improvised music in advance.
Mostly that is true. Like what Robert just said, the image of the feather is very open.
Mm-hmm.
So we have an image, we have a nice title, and we have a lot of freedom how to interpret it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think titles are very important, and I think about them a lot, and whenever what could be a title crosses my mind, I actually immediately write it down, because I know from experience, like, of course I'll remember that. What was that again? So I have an extensive file on my computer of potential titles, and then one finds titles. Someone says something, you read something, but there's a certain poetry to it, and it also immediately gives the listener a starting point. And I think anybody who names their piece Stück Eins is just comping out. And they're not improving anything when they get to Stück 13. And often the image of a title itself is what can get the music started.
Let's talk a little bit about how the music started. Robert, can you tell us a little bit about how you developed flute playing? How was it when you started playing? What were the possibilities back then, and what did you want to change in flute playing?
Well, I started the flute when I was 8 years old, and my mother was a piano teacher, and she was a teacher of beginners, and she was really, really good at that. And so I heard her, she taught in our apartment, and I heard her begin countless beginners, and they had one note at a time, plink, 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 and soon there was doom, plink, plink, and then there were chords. My older brother played the cello, and he was sawing away at one note, and pretty soon he was sawing away at two. I thought all the instruments did that. So when I asked for the flute, I had heard it on the radio in a top 40 hit called Rockin' Robin. It was actually a piccolo, not a flute, but I had no idea. But that's the sound I want. I knew it instantly. And I knew at the first flute lesson that this is what I was going to do. I couldn't have articulated it at that time, but I knew. And I gave my first concert that night. When my father came home from work, I set up 2 chairs, and I huffed and puffed through page 1 of the Ruback Elementary Method for my parents. My favorite moment of those early lessons was when one learned a new note. And, generally they were going higher and higher. And one week, my teacher and I came to the moment when we did the new note. And he went right on. And I said, well, don't we have a new note? And he said, well, no, you know all the notes now. Well, there are actually more notes, but it's okay. And so I said, well, don't we do 2 notes now? And he broke the news. The flute plays only 1 note at a time. I was furious. Absolutely. So disappointed and so upset. 1 note, everybody else gets chords and their melody note, and we don't? What did we do? It just seemed so absurdly unfair. And this was shortly after my 9th birthday. And, you know, the smoke was curling out of my little ears because I was really deeply upset. And I can't tell you where it came from, but I remember clearly thinking at that moment, that is going to change. And it has. So, you know, the idea went to sleep for a period as I was, you know, the initial presentation of what a flutist will do is to play in an orchestra. And I thought for, you know, when I was in junior high school, which is the equivalent of gymnasium here, that I would be an orchestra player. If you had asked me at age 17 what I was going to do with my life, I would have told you in no uncertain terms that I was going to be the solo flutist of the New York Philharmonic. And I was doing everything possible towards that goal. And but in high school, this other dream began to wake up. And as I experienced orchestral playing at higher levels, I realized it was not for me. Mm-hmm. There was this person waving a stick around who just had to go. I know it's just not my nature. I'm not a good follower, and I don't want to be a follower. And so I went not to music school, but to a university, and there I met people with much broader outlooks, and my creative work was encouraged. And so I set out without knowing where it was going to lead musically, but I set out to try to find every sound the flute could make. Excluding only things that were damaging. Was not interested in damaging the performer, damaging the flute, or damaging the audience. Well, an awful lot of rock and roll players do a lot of damage to the audience. And so that was kind of my mad scientist phase, as my friend Rindy Eckert puts it. And it resulted in my first book, The Other Flute, which is still the standard work for composers and performers looking, it's a kind of dictionary of sound. And so as time went on, I felt I evolved from a classical musician to a flutist, very interested in contemporary music. And in that period, I asked people to write me music, but my own creativity was waking up, and eventually I evolved into a composer, performer. And it's been years and years and years since really I've played anyone else's music except in creative musical situations, such as our duo. But I still engage with classical flute music in my teaching, because most of the flute playing population needs music in front of them, and it's just you need to know the past if you wish to expand the future.
Okay, and then
is that a good enough sermon? Because I'm going to pass the plate now.
Yeah, that was already a very good answer, and I'm still curious to hear more about the techniques themselves. So there was the intervallic playing that you tried to invent, or even chordal playing, combining it with singing, then circular breathing.
Yes.
I think it was the first time I heard circular breathing on the flute. I heard it on saxophone, of course, on the oboe.
Circular breathing is ancient.
Yeah.
And it's arisen in virtually every culture, and not necessarily for musical reasons. Glass blowers circular breathe, because they have to keep a positive pressure in the molten forms. Well, the limit of having to stop at the breath was, something that, just wasn't acceptable. Well, I was extremely influenced by electronic music. And in a way, what I've wanted to do all my life is to play electronic music on the flute. And I was very influenced by the idea of continuous transformation of sound. And so I actually went to music school for my second degree as a composer, not as a flutist. There is not a single piece of paper anywhere that says that I can play the flute. And a moment in Stockhausen's Kontakte changed my life, where the sound of a gong was turned into the sound of a woodblock in continuous steps. And I thought, wow, I want to do that, as I play the flute. And so the techniques all were absorbed, towards the purpose of musical. Well, initially not. Initially it was like, I've just got to find out a bunch of possibilities, and I'll figure out what to do with them as I go along. But as time has gone on, it's much more, what is the musical vision? If the sound doesn't exist for that vision, I will invent it. As does Ursel.
Yeah, I mean, you also don't just play the keys. So how does the extended techniques of Robert influence your playing? And when it comes to the prepared piano, often people relate to John Cage, but you don't really, so this is not where you come from. Maybe you can talk about this a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny, there's also an anecdote from Mexico, but not with Robert, when all of a sudden somebody raised up in the audience and said, well, and how are you doing all this? And we tried to have a conversation about the difference between what John Cage did and what I was trying to do. I mean, the big difference is that Cage composes the pieces exactly. He knows exactly which sound he wants when, and then the piano is actually prepared. I'm not preparing the piano. I need to be spontaneous, and I need to, from moment to moment, decide which sound I want to create. Plus, you don't have to tune the piano after I play like this. Nothing is between the strings to get a certain multiphonic or something. I always wanted to stay acoustic, because otherwise I thought I might as well play a different instrument and do a synthesizer. But I love to just expand what you can do without damaging the piano to create other sounds, and some of them are pretty simple to do. But not so many people are using them. And I started to get interested when I played with people who also used electronics. Oh, here's my new sound effect. And I was like, well, what am I going to do? I need to come up with something. And I started to put objects on the strings and play with that. And it's so cool to have a bigger repertoire. And when I started to work with Robert, because of all the sonic richness that you have, I was of course challenged just to come up with good ideas what to do with that.
You've done really well.
Thank you. And there also has been a phase for some years where I thought, well, I've done this inside piano and it always sounds the same. I have my range of sounds. And then comes a new situation and I feel like, oh, this is exactly the sound that I need for this moment to work with a dancer. And then all of a sudden I hear something and I can go there and it sounds actually different even though it's the same material. And then I thought that yes, the keys are also always the same keys, but depending on how you use it, it sounds a little different than last time, even though you have the same material. So it's an interesting process.
You know, there's a mistaken assumption that many people have that one is always trying to play something that one has never played before. You know, but I've my whole life I've never played a concert that didn't have a C natural in it, and you know, and it's so true. It's well how you use the resources. And if you're always looking, if it's only about being different, it backfires because then everything sounds the same.
Well, at the same time, you want to just research and play what you hear and be content with it, and don't feel like you're repeating something that you don't really find exciting because you've done it before.
Yeah.
So
well, the research part I like to do at home, all by myself. You know, someone once said, you know, it must be great to be your neighbor. And I said, oh, no, it's not. I play some of the most awful sounding stuff imaginable when I'm just working on things. And you know, when you're pushing the envelope in multiphonic technique, you can produce some really horrible sound, which can, of course, be eventually turned into something quite beautiful, but you know, when you think about the greatest opera singers, their initial vocalizations in the crib were not that pretty, so practice is practice. The experimentation is experimentation. The exploration is the exploration, but that's not what comes out in performance. And trusting intuition and trusting your own creativity is not the same thing. You know, it overlaps experimenting in the sense that, yes, I've often played things that I haven't played before in concert, but it wasn't because I wanted to play something I'd never played before. It was that the music was going there.
Yeah, I think that's really an important point, that it's simply about the motivation.
Yeah. So I mentioned that I'm not a good follower, but when the music itself, I do follow. And I think I'm an okay follower in that sense. I just don't want to follow any conductors.
I just want to say now, in case you have some questions, you can think about questions if you would like to ask them later. For the moment, I would like to talk about your experience of New York. You come from New York, you have lived there quite a long time. We're here in Berlin. It's a really exciting city when it comes to free music of all kind. And so you have long experience of being in the city and seeing, hearing what was going on there. What have been the really exciting moments for you, or the exciting musicians, the exciting scenes where you have been participating, or where you have listened to it, be inspired by? Maybe you could start, Robert. I mean, it's a big question, of course. Or you?
I came to New York by an opportunity that I didn't see coming, so it was a very spontaneous decision to go, and I wanted to become a better musician, and I was very much in the jazz world at the time. And one phase that was really important to me, it was to go to one jam session where I met musicians who I felt were really living the music. And it was very different from what I experienced when I studied, where often, we would learn a piece of music by looking at the melodies and the changes and learn how to play it correctly, and everybody was very uptight to do it correctly. And I didn't really know the people who created the pieces. I didn't really listen to the music so much. And then I got to play a lot with people who were, that was their life. And it was a completely different depth and approach. So I also was not accepted very quickly. So I had to build those relationships. I had to show that I was really serious, that I would go home and practice and come back the next time and over time develop. That was a really interesting experience. I never wanted to be a jazz musician who would record jazz standards, because I always thought that many people do that so well that that's not my need to do that, but as a foundation for everything else what I do, that was strong. So I took some lessons with jazz people. Somebody very important in the early phase was Joanne Brackeen. She was a jazz musician one of the very few jazz women who I knew and I had records of here in Kassel before I came. And I admired her whole, like, her persona, her compositions, her playing. She was just super excellent. And she also was pushing, like, oh, you compose music? Next week I want to hear a piece. And then another one, and then another one. And so there was also this underlying belief that I could do that. Like, everybody can write a piece. And I usually have a long like incubating period where I'm not sure whether it's good enough, blah blah blah. And so she was like, no, I want to hear this. So, and at the same time there was this open improvisation scene. I went to the Knitting Factory a lot. I heard everybody who was in that circuit, and it was interesting to see that people didn't have, we talked about boundaries before, didn't have boundaries. Everybody does everything, so it's not a question whether you are doing completely free improvised music or a composition or electronics or electroacoustic music or whatever. People are exposed to such a wide range of ideas that you can just take all that in and not question so much if something is more interesting or better. There are so many interesting directions that people take and so much individuality. So that was, for me, that was really great. So when I came back to Germany, I'm trying to keep that and to also push some people I'm playing with right now to try other things. And I'm challenged. You mentioned that I'm interested in sharing music with people from all around the globe. In New York, that was possible, to hear people from all kinds of different cultures and to do something traditional or not traditional with it. So it's a give and take all the time to learn and to expand your spectrum of experiences.
Well, any major city will have a lot of opportunities if you avail yourself of them. Berlin, for example, and you know, I grew up in New York, and I'm actually a third-generation native New Yorker. People say, "Oh my gosh, there's actually one of you," but there are many of us, and And so, I don't know, I kind of grew up with the assumption that there was excellence of every kind. And I find a lot of inspiration actually from going to art exhibitions. New York is a great place for that. Just standing in front of a Kandinsky and soaking it in is incredibly inspiring to me. And then also looking at work from people that nobody's never heard of. I probably spend too much of my limited resources on buying art. So, I've heard many concerts that I felt were really transporting, and participated in concerts that were transporting. Other people, I think, are the most interesting thing in life, and other people do amazing things. And so one of the concerts that really I participated in, but I felt, wow, we've gone to really special places, was a group put together by Lucas Ligeti, the percussionist, with the bass player Ken Filiano, and Lucas, and an incredible trumpet player Thomas Herber, who I had never played with before. And so we had an incredible connection, and it was free improvised music. There was no plan except we'll start and eventually we'll finish. That's a very effective plan. And I've heard just so many musicians in my life. I'm thinking I ought to be able to unleash a catalog for you, but somehow the names aren't coming. And also participating in the music of from people who have quite different approaches. Ursel plays in Hans Thomann's Third Eye Orchestra, which I did play in for a time. I had to leave it because it was too loud and I have hearing issues. But I would love to keep playing in it, but it's just I can't play in loud groups anymore. And Hans's approach to structure and improvisation is really interesting and very different from what we do. And then there was a long time ago I played in with John Zorn a lot when he was doing the game pieces. And that was a real eye-opener. And I still occasionally have my animal calls that I play in the flute. I don't use them that often, but in a new project, I've actually started to play with a harpist. We have flute and piano, and now flute and harp. That's a duo that's loaded with preconceptions, which we don't care about. So I have my predator call in the flute, and it will really peel the paint off the walls. I think it's a matter of being open and being willing, and ready to observe that when things happen that you actually see them and don't scream them out. In a city like New York, that also means that you're going to see things that are very painful and very horrific. And urban life is not idealistic, and life in a decaying capitalist place like the United States, where everything is determined by money and politics, is really loaded with awfulness as well. And I often think, my God, why do we have to experience this squalor? I mean, they don't do that in Germany, for God's sake. Or in so many places I've been. I was on the subway in Taiwan, and I thought, if there is a subway heaven, I have arrived. I mean, this is how it should be. And it's just because everybody agrees that it should be this way. Why can't we do that? The books of Carlos Castaneda were extremely influential for me because it's the description of an incredible teacher-student relationship over a very extended time, the subject being sorcery, and Carlos actually graduated, and the initial phases were all about trying to free yourself from the preconceptions that you walk around with without even thinking about all the time. And I used to practice the eye exercises that Carlos's teacher, Don Juan, recommended, and wow, it really made a difference. And so it's a matter of also just being observant, and not just focused in your thing. And
Can I
so
Can I add something to this?
Pardon?
Can I add something to this?
Of course.
I think it was important that you said that it doesn't matter who it is. New York is so full of people who are doing something creative, and it's always changing. People go, people come for short periods of time. There is always this exchange of a huge community. And I felt treated very seriously without having any name recognition, or I didn't have to prove that I was so-and-so for other musicians to want to share something together. And I found that an incredible experience, because when you go to New York, you're like, who am I? Nobody's going to wait here for somebody else who's developing their stuff. But I experienced quite the opposite. When you're open to things and you're playing with some person, the person might be somebody who's just about playing, or somebody with a big name, and it all relates to each other. So, and that's a beautiful thing about New York. Maybe because of all the differences that you're illustrating, with terrible subway rides to super excellent world-class stuff that you're surrounded by.
Yes.
Yeah, when I was asking this question now, I'm also thinking back to the talk that we've had already more than 2 years ago. It was about cultural framings of improvisation, and there we also talked about geographical influence. So what does the city do to you when you live there, when you experience the city, for example? That was one of several topics. I think it was said before that the concert and the talk was programmed for 2020 already, and it couldn't happen due to the pandemic, of course. But for me, I would just like to say this, it was a very special beginning. It was when I started this responsibility here for the thinking space, improvisation, and so it wasn't possible to do concerts, and so Ursel was only in Kassel, not in New York, so she came for my first talk, and we talked for 2 hours or so about gender issues in her book and about teaching a lot. So if you would like to hear more, at least of what Ursel has to say about these things, it's all online on our YouTube page, Exploratorium Berlin YouTube page, also the concerts. There's a big archive in the meantime. So maybe anybody would like to hear Ursel more, I would like to recommend this as well.
Thank you.
I might still have more questions, but maybe it's a good point to just ask if you would like to add something, or if there's something that you really want to know from the both of them. Is there anyone? Since we are doing a live stream, please use the microphone.
Thank you. Robert, you had been talking about this give and take between audience and performers. Everybody knows this. But how was this when you went to the studio to make the recording?
My hearing for voices isn't the greatest.
It was about the question, what do you do in the studio when there's no audience? Because you've been talking about the energy which comes from the audience.
What do I do when there's no audience?
Yeah.
When did you record this? Your recording?
What's the studio atmosphere as opposed to a live?
That's a very interesting question. I love being in recording studios, I have to say. It's when I'm there, I feel I'm doing what I should be doing. It's an angst-free environment, and I do feel a kind of energy very similar to performance, and there's that sense of, okay, this is it, this counts. This isn't practice at home. This is it. And so the best solo improvising I ever recorded is on a CD of only contrabass flute playing. I actually have 2 contrabass flutes. I keep one in New York, which is a really good instrument, and I was playing on that one. And John Zorn had challenged me to make a only contrabass flute CD, and wow, I had worked on the low flute stuff for months and months and months, and then the entire thing was done in one morning in just over 2 hours, And afterwards he said, "I'll bet you didn't think you could do it." I said, "You're right, John, I didn't think I could." But it's the best solo improvising I've recorded so far. I think my solo playing has transcended that, but I haven't had a chance to record yet. And so, and when you're with other people, you generate your own energy. Recently I recorded a piece by the composer Sarah Weaver, who has got a her own approach to improvisation. And it was a trio for the bass trombonist Dave Taylor, me playing. If you have a contrabass flute, people want you to play it. And Sarah playing electronics. And, we really had a performance energy, although it was just the 3 of us together in a very small room. So, what's so important is that at the moment, you don't think about yourself. The worst thing you can think about when you're making music, in any situation, in any kind of music, is to think about yourself. And so, it's a very important mental discipline that that little voice in your head is singing the music, not talking. Because as soon as it's talking, you are out of the music. And I learned about that from Stanislavski's famous book, An Actor Prepares. And his chapter on concentration of attention is really important for anybody who wants to perform anything. And so, and a lot of times people become self-conscious in the studio. You know, they're there, they've got this microphone in front of them that normally isn't there. You know, there's...
I mean, to be totally honest, we had those moments when we were in the studio trying to get these CDs together and to do another take and then another one, and we didn't like it. And so it's, I think it's a relevant question because it's not always easy to get this performance energy happening when you're at the same time thinking, well, now we want to get it really right. And it is also a process. It's not always successful to just say,
true.
oh, yeah, well, the microphone is on. I'm just transcending everything, and the first take is it. That's
No, I didn't mean to imply that when I go in the recording studio, it's like a water fountain where only genius bubbles.
Yeah, you made it sound pretty easy. But,
Well,
yeah.
I'm an idealistic person, what can I say? So,
Some
no,
of these
I mean, sometimes
are,
it's, as I said before, sometimes it's just really hard to.
Yeah.
Yeah, but talking about the CDs, there are 2 CDs of your solo, of your duo. I'm sorry.
Yes, we want to do another one, but it's just
There's-
in the early stages.
There's photos here, and then the Galilean Moons. And I think you also brought them in case anyone is interested. They are
There are
available.
even 2 right here on the table.
Yeah, I can show you. But these are not for sale. These are from our library.
Ah.
We have a library.
Yes. Well, watch this space. There will be another one. Can't tell you exactly when, but it will happen.
Any more questions or remarks? Do you have questions for the audience?
I think we've covered a lot of ground here.
Well, I do have a question. How do you feel about the difference between hearing music that you don't know where it's going to go or what it's going to do versus music that you do? I mean, when you hear classical music, for example, even if it's a piece you've never heard before, there are many times where expectation is set up and expectation is fulfilled, where in improvised music, there's less, I think, clear delineation of expectation. And how do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's really a good question. Does anybody have an answer to this? Or not, maybe not an answer, but an idea of your own experience.
It's wonderful. It's an adventure, you know. You can hear music you never heard this. It's fantastic. For me, it's fantastic.
Okay, I couldn't.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's nice to not know what is going to happen as an improvisation. That was the answer. For me, it also makes yeah.
You said fantastic.
Fantastic, yeah. It was not,
If you're going to translate it, no.
No.
The emphasis was
fantastic, yeah.
Do you have something to say about that?
It makes sense for me to work at Exploratorium Berlin, a space dedicated to improvisation, because this is what I find really exciting. I really like the situation of not knowing what is going to happen, and also of people playing what is just themselves. So on the one thing is that the music is strongly connected to the personality who is playing, and on the other hand,
Of course, the different personalities come together, and there's always a new mix of personalities coming together, or there's a group which is playing often, of course, and this makes it really exciting about all the interrelations, because that it's always full of surprises and new things which can happen, and I really prefer this situation to people looking into scores, I can say. So it makes a huge difference for me personally. All right, but it's true, we covered really a lot, and we haven't been talking only, there was the music before, so maybe all the rest we can just talk about with a drink, and so I would like to thank both of you, first of all, Robert Dick and Ursel Schlicht.
Thank you.
Really exciting, and I want to thank you for your attention, of course. The next talk, which I will host here at Exploratorium, will be on Echtzeitmusik. This is a kind of specific Berlin thing, maybe one can say. It will be hosted by Andrea Neumann together with me, and she invited 3 composers, more or less, and it will be about material and motivation. Why do we do that, and how do we do it in Echtzeitmusik? And you were mentioning Kandinsky a little bit. This is on the 8th of December, I have to say, and 2 days later we have a project on Kandinsky. It's a 3D Kandinsky version, which is going to happen at Exploratorium on the 10th of 11. So maybe that's something for you. We'll be happy when you come back and see each other again. Thanks again, and goodbye.
Thank you.